So, how many languages do I speak? Well, that's a question that I get quite regularly, and today I will answer that question in this video. When you speak a foreign language and people find out that you're actually not speaking your native language, and sometimes you're gonna have this question, which language do you speak? And I always say, I think I'm stay humble most of the time. Look at this beautiful view, by the way, here in Abbaye de la Cambre. It's a little bit. Most of the time when I get this question, I stay pretty humble. Most of the time I say, like here in Brussels, for example, I say speak French and then English and Dutch. Well, when people get really curious, and they start asking for more, oh, so you've lived in China as well, do you also speak Chinese? And then I obviously also say that I speak the other language. But in this video today I will share with you guys which languages are my best ones, which ones I don't speak very well. Now the first one is obviously Dutch, right? That's my mother tongue. My Dutch, as some of you have noticed, is not super standard. So I'm like from the south. In the south our accent is slightly different than from other regions in the Netherlands. It's also not like the Belgians speak Flemish. That's different. I would say that like the way that we speak in my hometown is a little bit more like in between. So it's not really Dutch. It's also not Flemish. It's an in between. I have no problem at all communicating with both. It's both very easy for me to understand. Even here in Flanders, there's many words. I also like the way of pronunciation. Sometimes it's pretty similar to how we do it in our local dialect. Now, English is the second language I speak. And, it was only until 2007 when I went to Costa Rica for the first time alone. I went for the first time, I went on a big trip outside of Europe alone, and only then I had to use it for the first time. But before that, I'd only been using English at school, basically, so from books and in the classroom. And I remember that it was very different, but very different to speak a language in real life, basically with real persons. Now, I've been speaking English basically since I started traveling, so that's 2007. And, in the past, 8 years, I visited all these crazy places. I visited 105 countries now. And, most of the time I end up speaking English. I'm here in I basically do everything in English. I work in English, my emails are in English, social media are in English, I shoot these videos in English. So, I think I understand almost as much in English as in my native Dutch. Obviously, I speak with an accent, I make mistakes here and there, but in general, English is not really a problem with me. I even use it with my girlfriend, who is actually a French speaker. So I really use, at the moment actually, I do use more English than Dutch. My third strongest language at the moment is probably, it used to be Mandarin Chinese, but I think now it's French. I started learning French 3 years ago. After I learned Portuguese and Spanish, and I really experienced learning French as something easy to do. After Spanish and Portuguese, obviously, because French isn't that easy. But if you already speak a Romance language, it's, by the way, also a language that I studied at high school for a few years, but I was, you know how it goes, learning language at school. You do not really learn how to speak. But I learned that 3 years ago, and these days I hear French, like here in Brussels, I hear it all the time. Also, I do also speak French with my mother-in-law, and also like just with the people on the streets here, basically, where I go to the shop, when I go to a shop, in the hospital. anywhere basically. It's a language that I use all the time here in Brussels. I do not really have in-depth conversations most of the time. So after my native Dutch, English and French, my fourth strongest language is probably Mandarin Chinese. And that's because I lived in China for 2 years and I basically did everything in Chinese. I have like relationships entirely in Chinese. Also friendships in Chinese. I talk to customers in Chinese. I needed to search for an apartment. I did the whole thing in Chinese. I've had haircuts in Chinese, also very important thing. I've done a lot of things in Chinese, and I think that's really the reason why I feel so confident in this language. Also, because people do not really expect, being a foreigner in China or here in Europe, people do not really expect you to speak Chinese. So it's always a nice surprise, and people always really, like the Chinese, always really appreciate when you speak that language. So that makes me feel more confident. And although my understanding and my vocabulary in French is much wider than in Chinese, for example, I still think that I feel more confident in Chinese just because of the fact that they don't expect you to speak it. Now, after Dutch, English, French, Chinese, and my fifth language is probably going to be Portuguese. Brazilian Portuguese. I spent the time in Brazil a few years ago, and of course Lucas, the co-founder of LanguageBoost, who you don't see very often in the YouTube videos, by the way. He's from Brazil, and he taught me Portuguese basically. So now and then we, just for fun, we speak Portuguese. Not very often, but he's definitely the person who helped me to learn it. Now, I spent, I think, combined 6 months in Brazil, where I learned Chinese pretty intensively. So I think that I got to a good level where I can understand the news, read the newspapers, read the articles. These days I don't do so much with the language anymore, but I think it's not so easy to forget it anymore for me at this stage. Okay, then language number, what are we? So we have Dutch, English, French, Chinese, Portuguese. Then number 6 is probably going to be German, although it's a language that I learned at school after English. It's not one of the languages that I speak the best because I've never really set my mind to it. I've never really made it a challenge for myself to speak good German. But German isn't that different from Dutch, so I can understand it very well. I think my German speaking is okay, although I make some mistakes in the grammar here and there. Also sometimes, I might have to search for vocabulary, but in general, I still think that I can do a lot of things in German. It doesn't feel very natural for me to speak it, but I would say my German is okay for now. At least I'm satisfied. I'm satisfied with my level. After German, it's probably going to be Spanish. So Spanish, another language I have a little bit of a love-hate relationship with. Spanish started a long time ago, I think almost 10 years ago. When I went to Costa Rica, taking Spanish courses, hoping to learn Spanish, but I did not really succeed in learning it because, I was just there having fun, having a good time, and I was not that interested in the language at all. These days, traveling around Latin America, Spain, Canary Islands, where I was 2 weeks ago, every time I hear the language again, and I practice it well. I think I'm okay, maybe not as bad as I thought. Yeah, I can have conversation, I just don't feel very confident because, again, a lack of speaking experience. But I can watch the news, read the newspaper, hold conversations, socialize, these kind of things. It's probably gonna be Cantonese. So you have, of course, Mandarin Chinese and you have Cantonese. Now, Cantonese is the language that they speak in Hong Kong, and it's although there are many similarities with Mandarin, you know, I really consider it as a different language. It's like, for me, the difference between Mandarin and Cantonese is really just like the difference between, let's say, Dutch and German, or maybe even a bigger difference. So I really see it as a different language. I decided to learn it a few years ago. This was for the At One challenge. Brian asked me to join him, and yeah, I learned Cantonese for 3 months, and actually I managed to hold, you know, quite decent conversations in Cantonese after just 3 months. I struggled, but I did it. And also after those 3 months, I studied some Cantonese on my own, so now and then. At the moment, I don't think that my Cantonese is very good. So yeah, that's my 7th language. Probably I can hold simple conversations. That's basically it. Like even watching movies or like the news, all these things is way too difficult for me in Cantonese. These things I cannot do. But just simple interactions, having fun, socialize a little bit, is okay. In-depth conversations, you know, these kind of things is too tricky for me at the moment. So that was number 7. Now then I think that after Cantonese is probably gonna be, is that number 7? Am I missing a language? I think it was number 8. Well, if that was number 8, then number 9 is gonna be Russian. A little bit of a love-hate relationship with the Russian language. So I started Russian 2 years ago, and yeah, these days, what can I do? Simple conversations. I mean, we do Language Boost. We have with Language Boost we have a partner in Russia, and you know, from time to time we have Skype calls which are entirely in Russian, which I can understand. You know, as long as I understand the topic, I can follow it pretty well, but it's difficult for me. Like most of the time when I have to give my input, I just speak English, because speaking Russian I really experience as something extremely tricky. Like with Mandarin Chinese, for example, you can learn a few words and you can start speaking it, right? As long as you get the syllables and the tones right. But for Russian, you need much more. You need much more than the vocabulary and the structure. You need to know at least some basic grammar. And that's something that's holding me back. I can have conversations for fun, and this year I will definitely upload more conversations or more videos of me speaking Russian on this YouTube channel. But I really consider it as a difficult language, and I can speak it, just socialize, but you know, I do not really get the details of an in-depth conversation. And look at that beautiful view. It's a good location, by the way, to walk around and shoot a video like this, right? Now, so what else do we have? I think the 10th language is probably going to be Thai, but you know, I didn't really consider that as a language that I speak at the moment. Last year in Thailand we did this Learn Thai mission, and you know, I could hold really simple conversations, asking simple questions, putting simple sentences together. But that's about my limit when it comes to Thai. I never really, you know, I tried to learn the alphabet. I found it extremely difficult to learn the alphabet. So I give up. Well, I still understand it more or less, but not entirely. And then language number 11, and that's the language that I'm learning now, is Italian. I only started learning Italian this week. This is actually my 5th day, and you know, I noticed that even though I have very little experience with Italian, I have never spoken it basically, but I'm already able to understand much more than in Russian, for example, because of the similarities, obviously, that it has with, you know, French, Spanish, and Portuguese, the other Romance languages basically. So I expect that I can at least, I really think that my Italian can surpass my Russian in just 1 month. Yeah, because of the similarities. But let's see, maybe it's not as easy as I think. maybe it's a little bit more tricky. We're gonna find out soon. So yeah, these were my 11 languages. Although Thai, I do not really consider as a language that I speak at the moment. So maybe the number, more or less like 10. Now, if you want to test me, you know, always fun, then I'm looking forward to meeting you, you know, somewhere in person. That can be at Polyglot conference, at Polyglot gathering. I go to these events most of the time. I'm also going to Bratislava by the end of this month. So if you speak one of the languages that, you know, that I speak, then feel free to approach me, and yeah, you can do a little test with me. Thanks for watching. That was it for today, and greetings from this beautiful garden in Brussels. Ciao, ciao.